Upgrading .NET Apps to Aspire with Brady Gaster.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast and deliver quality and to run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. The podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a full-service software architecture and engineering firm that serves companies using .NET, Azure, and other Microsoft technologies. We build mission-critical software and also rescue failing projects, always empowering software delivery with a proven approach. I'm really excited to announce that my latest book is now fully released. It is for software leaders. It's called The 5 Pillars: Leadership for Effective Custom Software. The book is for anyone who's attempting to make a custom software team highly effective. And if you want your team to deliver world-class results, this book could be for you. I hope it's helpful. Teams are also doing book studies and discussions around it, and I'm excited about that. We have a book study guide that's available. And if you, dear listener, would like a complimentary electronic copy of the book, then just send me an email and I'd be happy to get it to you. And for those who are in a lead architect or software executive role, you might be interested in joining our monthly interactive forums. These are deeply technical sessions that I enjoy facilitating myself. It's a conversation, it's a meeting. You can sign up for those at clearmeasure.com. I have a returning guest today on the show. It's Brady Gaster. And he's been on the show several times before, last on episode 295. We'll include that in the show notes. But Brady Gaster is a principal program manager on the .NET and Visual Studio team at Microsoft, where he works on Orleans, SignalR, microservices, APIs, and integration with Azure service teams in hope of making it exciting for developers who work on .NET apps to party in the cloud. Brady, welcome back to the show. How are you, sir?
Doing good. Thanks a lot. I'm glad that your book came out. I have to definitely sing its praises. I got a polite request from you to provide feedback on it. And by the time I started reading it and thinking of feedback that I wanted to provide, I was seeing all the feedback that I would have said in my email. So it felt like somebody quicker than me got basically the same feedback to you that I would have given you. It's a great book. I have long respected your ability to bail projects out. So
Thanks.
The way you wrote about it in there was really good. So I definitely encourage everybody to pick it up. It was good.
Thanks. Yeah, you and I think around 70 other people had agreed to just provide feedback as technical reviewers, and just absolutely great feedback that made the book better than it would have been just on my initial draft. So grateful
cool.
for all of you and all the other reviewers.
That's cool. That's good. Feedback makes it better, I know one thing you wanted to chat about today was a very little presentation that I gave, and I was actually stoked you saw it, on Aspire with, shall we say, non-traditional Aspire deployment targets.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you a little bit about it, how that talk came to be. What was the name of that thing? What do we call it?
So,
probably have it in the show notes.
I will include a link in the show notes, but there was a .NET Aspire Day back in September, and all the presentations are available online. But yeah, you gave a great presentation building new and retrofitting old apps with .NET Aspire to streamline your development process. And there's so many .NET apps out there, and all of the samples and intention is, file new project Aspire. But wait a minute, I've got existing .NET apps. These are cool capabilities. Is there any way to add these in? And you provided some really good examples, and you've been doing a lot of work on that. And I thought, the listeners need to hear this.
Yeah, it was fun. I can tell you how that came to be. I don't think we had a podcast after the MVP Summit until now. But during MVP Summit, I had one small thing on campus to do with, it wasn't MVP. Was it MVP Summit or was it
in March?
Was it VS Live? It might have been VS Live. I can't remember which one it was. It might have been VS Live in the summer that they brought us in for. But I think it was, because it was about a month later that we did the talk. So in that panel discussion with myself and Fowler and Damien, we had a couple of obvious questions. People learning Aspire and trying stuff out, and
Yeah.
asking questions about deploying to ACA, asking questions about deploying to Kubernetes, those kinds of things. And Damien said something that he said for quite some time with the product. He goes, remember, Aspire is for development purposes. If you already have, .NET, deploying somewhere, you don't have to change that. And in fact, it was one of the things that we talked about really early in the development of Aspire. Give you some insights into kind of how things percolate. Very, very, very early into the development of Aspire, before .NET 8 came out, like that whole train when we shipped it, the first drop of Aspire build last year. One of the things that that folks were telling me as the VS person, and we were also telling our execs, was people can deploy Aspire apps exactly the same way they always deploy their apps today. Whatever they're using, they can continue to use. Executives were asking, I think at one point, the boss asked, so is there like a right-click publish feature? And we were like, yeah, no, there's not. Like, people can keep doing what they've always done. But clearly that's not good. You know what I mean? Like, if we're shipping this new thing, we need to ship a new way to publish on top of it.
Yeah.
Between you and I was very happy with where we landed on that part of the story. And that was, .NET can do it well. But who does it really well is AZD. Like, the AZD team, they've already got that product. They already know how it works. Nobody likes, writing IAC. Well, I like writing IAC code, but I'm weird. Most people don't like writing IAC code unless you're really into CI/CD, which I guess you are. So you and I are probably weird.
Good acronyms to define AZD.
IAC, infrastructure as code. Yeah. AZD is the Azure Developer CLI. Sorry, I should probably call it out more. And then IAC is kind of the gamut of things like Bicep and ARM. Infrastructure as code. Some people use Terraform. I think in your CI/CD practice, you've used all of the above. I tend to stick to Bicep. I really like writing Bicep. I'm strange. Bicep is kind of the new later language, meta language for Azure configuration. So the Aspire team collaborated pretty deeply with the Azure Developer CLI team, and we basically came up with this way that you could have Aspire sort of inspect what's called you can have AZD inspect the Aspire manifest, which is essentially a JSON file. That kind of represents everything in the application's topology. And at runtime, it would take that application manifest, generate Bicep from it, and then, not even save the Bicep to disk. It would just run the Bicep template. There's a call in AZD that you can make. You can say AZD infra synth, because I like synthesizers, and what that'll do is that'll synthesize your IAC to disk. And then you can actually hand it off to your PE person or your DevOps person and like set that provisioning up later on. But in the case of my session, I was talking about you're not doing file new. You've already got an app.
Yeah, right.
And the app that I chose was a demo app that Shane and I think Jason worked on, and it was AZD Blazor. And their goal was, it's kind of funny how the goals build on one another. Their goal was to show how to create a SQL server that hosts like the ASP.NET Core identity subsystems tables in it, so that a Blazor front end app could use ASP.NET Core identity or ASP.NET identity, whatever the name is. They already had a working AZD template. So I said, well, this thing works. Like, I've already got an app that I deploy using it, that I've customized the UI for. Let me actually just bring that down and, to quote our good friend Donovan, rub a little Aspire on it. Like, I basically wanted to like Aspirify a project, not necessarily add anything to the project. I didn't need to add Redis. Didn't need any cloud resources. I just wanted to have the ability to F5 that project locally, build on it using Aspire, have it create the database every time using a container, the whole nine. And then when I'm ready, just commit the code and let whatever already wired up keep going trucking, because I've already got an AZD template.
Yeah.
The Shane wrote, it's better than I could have done. And I've already got it deployed somewhere. I don't need to change that. I just want to use Aspire to do my local host development. So I spent a couple of days, between the day we were on campus doing the panel discussion and the day we had that session, or the day that they asked for the call for papers. And what happened in that panel was interesting. We had a couple of people asking, What about this with AZD? What about this with Bicep? What if I'm on app service? What about? And we started to feel the need to remind everybody again and again and again, y'all, it's just .NET. You just can keep doing everything you were already doing. And at some point I asked one participant, he had a lot of really great questions, and we could tell that a lot of his questions were like, if you think about this stuff forensically, if you've been around as long as you and I have, you start to pick up on these themes and the questions that people are asking. And this guy's themes were all about moving his stuff to Aspire. That kind of made us all shudder a little bit. We were like, you're going to do a lot more work than we think you need to do. Like, what are your goals here? And he was like, well, when I look at Aspire, I see the this, I see the that, I see the components. At the time they were components, now they're integrations.
Yeah.
I see the integrations. I see the integration with AZD. I see, how I can publish to, Azure Container apps. I just want to do it all. And we were like, you don't need to do it all. Like, you don't need to do everything we gave you. And he was like, so I would just keep deploying using Terraform. And we said, yeah, keep deploying using Terraform. Like, if you're not using containers today, Aspire's not going to make you use containers for everything that you're already not using containers for. Sure, we might like run Redis in a container instead of running the Redis on your machine or on somebody else's machine because it's on Linux. But you don't have to do that. And it felt like we were hearing the community say, in order to use Aspire, I have to use all or nothing.
Yeah.
So my session kind of came in on that and said, no, you don't. So what I did was I kind of took Shane's example and worked backwards from it. I think it maybe took me 7 minutes. To get, like, without having tried it before. I went home from the panel that afternoon and pulled that repo again and deployed it 3 or 4 times to make sure there weren't any like nuances here or there. And sure enough, like that AZD template, that's one of the reasons they have it in the awesome AZD gallery. It just works every single time.
Yeah.
But a lot of developers really like it just works when they're talking about SQL and app service. It's just that local development experience can be a bit of a PITA. Do you want your migrations to drop your database today? Are you pointing to the wrong database? Oh God, let's not drop production. La 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 la. So you get into all of that. What we wanted to show them, and it sounds like I was kind of successful at doing in the third demo of that session, was to just kind of say, you don't have to change everything you want. The good news is, when you want to, it's there. So if you wanted to, say, add another component, like instead of having, web to SQL, if I wanted to go web to API to SQL, well, now Aspire is going to make that process really easy for you. If you wanted to just continue to deploy to app service, you don't have to touch any of the AZD deployment stuff because we don't have first-class deployment to app service. It's containers and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
If you wanted to add that API to your ARM, you could, or your bicep templates, and you could fire it off and party on it. If you want to move that application to Azure Container Apps, it's going to be really easy for you to do that because Aspire is built with, for all intents and purposes, sorry, Staples, an easy button that you can push whenever you want to, just do an AZD in and AZD out. So you do have that capability that you can just, use our built-in, integrations, bad word, with the Azure Developer CLI and the tools to just go directly to Azure Container Apps. And shortly around that time, we also added the support for deploying your dashboard to Azure Container Apps as well. Now, speaking about app service, there were some experiments that were done to enable kind of like right-click publish type capabilities directly inside of the Aspire to Bicep transmogrification. There was a couple of teams in App Service Linux team, who were able to get an Aspire application deployed to App Service Linux sidecars. And we were thinking maybe that would be a thing we wanted to try to do. We're not going to do it because it didn't have a lot of the scaling capabilities, didn't have full CADA built in and all that. But the App Service team have definitely asked, we've been collaborating a bunch about the idea of one day having Aspire go to App Service. It's definitely a sensitive topic because we're so orchestrated and containerized, and that was really the kind of the app gestalt that we were going for when we built Aspire. So there's some question marks as to whether or not it's really appropriate for that space. But given that we have so many customers who are on app service who want to use Aspire locally, that feels like a pretty good opportunity for the future. I've written a little bit about some of those, aspirations. And some of the folks in the app service team are kind of on board. Like, we like the idea. I don't know how first class we would get in terms of like your multi-node eShop style application, right-click deploy it up to app service. I just don't know if we would be able to get into that because
Yeah.
a lot of folks, you've seen this, a lot of folks deploy a bunch of app services that aren't in an ACE or aren't in a VNet.
Mm-hmm.
Now all of your calls are going to be going over the open internet.
Yeah.
Here's a tip: don't freaking do that.
Right.
Don't do that. Like put it in an ACE, put it in a virtual network, put it somewhere so that you've got like the only thing that's exposed is that front door. That's one of the really great things about Azure Container Apps is by default, an Aspire app that you deploy to it is not turned on. You don't have ingress turned on. You have to actually add code in your app host to turn that on. So we're secure by default with Aspire, which is nice to see. And we're using managed identity, et cetera, et cetera. So across the board, that part's all really good, but it was exciting to kind of prove out that you can take an application that's already getting deployed to app service using SQL and continue to do so, but use Aspire for your local host dev. Like that was exciting to kind of party on. In terms of feature sets and like plans, nothing concrete yet, but I'm glad that it was good for some folks to see that they can do that. What do you think about us having some sort of a resource specific to that? Do you think that there's a need for a doc that says, so you are on app service, you don't want to move off of it, you don't want to containerize, you don't want to orchestrate, but you want to use Aspire to build locally? Here's a doc on how to do that. Do you think that would be valuable?
Yes. I think there's two constituencies that need some clarity. And I know this is only major version 2 and so there's still a lot of work done. David Fowler, he was on the podcast a month ago. He made that pretty clear.
Good.
But there is a constituency that is asking the question, okay, is Docker containers the future in general? Like over time, is everything going to end up running inside of a container of some sort somehow? And is that the future reality? Is that what Microsoft's going to support? So do I need to be thinking architecturally in that mode? Or 10 years from now, is it still going to be just as normal to have brand new .NET apps that have no notion of a container at all? And then another is, if it's containers, does that automatically mean Kubernetes? Because we see in even the brand new Aspire template, there is a Kubernetes DLL. There is a dependency that's even in the starter template to get started. So is it one and the same from a dependency that an Aspire application does irrevocably have a dependency on Kubernetes, or what is the actual future? What is it going to be 10 years from now that people just need to understand however they get there?
That's a great question. Did you talk to Fowler about that? What Fowler's visions are? Kind of some ideas that he's got?
We didn't get that far in the future there, no.
Okay. One thing that he's seen, so to address your first question about containers and Kubernetes, do I think containers are the future? Yeah, I do. I think they're the present. I hope something easier than containers comes in the future, but today, containers are the way, because of the fact that you basically have everything that runs in one place, and anything that can host your container, it's going to run pretty much the same way. I haven't seen too many variants there. You know what I mean? It's also hard for you to write code that runs in a container in a way that targets the host. So things like your Windows reliance just kind of goes away, or your Linux reliance goes away. Like that I love a lot. One thing that I've seen Fowler do an experiment on, and I think he's made this public, he had a public repo out for it at some point, but one thing that he's been able to do in a very experimental prototype is to have essentially, dumb it way down. I'm probably gonna misspeak. I don't want to imply any plans here.
Sure.
Because we would need a lot of refinement on it first. But imagine like one C# file that has like a series of like app starting points. So like you literally have one CS file. One of the app starting points is like a web API. One of the app starting points is like a hello world website that takes some posts that passes them off to the API. One's a worker that spins on a queue, et cetera, et cetera. And David would do a .NET run and 3 processes would start up. Okay. 3 separate processes would start up. That was cool. We saw that happen and I was like, what did you just do? And he could control kind of how each process was, like he could scale one process up without the others. it was pretty interesting to see. It was almost like if you think of the goodness of functions, like just like writing the code in one place and it just, it can scale out and scale in however you need it to. It was kind of like seeing that without any of the plumbing. It was just done at run.
Gotcha.
So that was exciting. I think he did that before we worked on Aspire, before we were really deep into Aspire. That was exciting to see. I wouldn't be surprised if he has some ideas there. I know that he has some ideas around being able to isolate one's apps more astutely.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of the stuff that you probably saw snuck into one of the 9 release notes docs was the idea of eventing in Aspire. And you were probably in the early conversations we were having with a lot of the folks from like Mass Transit and Service Bus talking about the different eventing things that Safia was thinking of doing. A lot of that stuff was able to find its way into Aspire. I don't know how many of the abstractions we were able to bring forward that we had talked about back then.
Mm-hmm.
But eventing is showing up in Aspire, and that's pretty exciting. Couple that stuff with the integrations we've got with Azure Functions now in Aspire, you can really kind of start to see like this event-driven, system that we're building out. Because now you've got, I think we have 5 or 6 supported triggers with functions like storage blobs, storage queues, those kinds of things. But we're adding more triggers with each release so that functions developers have triggers that will both work inside of Aspire and in Azure Functions. So you can do that back and forth communication. That's what I've wanted for, like 8 or 9 years.
There is one theme that does appear to be emerging when you ask the question, what does a normal .NET application look like? And of course, it can look like anything, but there's always some dominant architectures. And when I started my career programming in the late 90s, everybody was talking about in tier, and just a stack of different processes. Each one called each other, and then RPC went to web services with SOAP, and then just with HTTP. And now you mentioned eventing. Microservices kind of came in, but microservices really didn't have staying power because there wasn't any clear implementation. It was like, and we've come back to the distributed application. And .NET Aspire, when I look at it and look at what kind of default architecture it encourages, it very much is a distributed application, not microservices where you have every service having its own data store, but you have multiple processes that are orchestrating and all together work on a kind of a master data store, but then you might have some other queues or some caches, some subordinate data stores, but very much a distributed application architecture. Am I observing this as intended, or how do you look at it?
Spot on. When we talk about the marketations, like what words to use and all the different kinds of ways that we talk about .NET Aspire, one that you always come back to because the human mind is a lazy space. You always come back to cloud native, and you always want to call it cloud native. I've really tried. Whilst I love that term, I don't like that it's now considered a marketing term.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that term always made sense. What is cloud native? My stuff runs in the cloud, either as serverless or in an orchestrated container. Well, that's everything. Yep, pretty much. It's an obtuse term. We started rat holing on the specificness of distributed application. And people go, what's a distributed application? API plus website plus other API plus storage database. Oh, okay. So like everything. Yeah, like everything. Some people would call that a monolith. Like, is Aspire good for monoliths? Monoliths are distributed applications. Check. It's good. What about microservices? Microservices, definitely distributed applications. Check. You're good. What about just a website with a SQL? Still good for dev. You've already got a deployment thing that probably works. You wouldn't want to change it, until you wanted to go to something that was orchestrated deployment. But yeah, you're good. I mean, Damien has said this 6 ways from Sunday. .NET Aspire is built on .NET.
Mm-hmm.
Like everything that you could do with .NET, you can still keep doing. We've added some hooks, some integrations, some tooling, some easy buttons throughout, not all of which you have to use. But if you are doing things like you're building a distributed application using multiple nodes that run in containers and you want to publish it to Azure Container apps, right hand of God, the best way to do it is using Aspire.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's no easier way, especially if you're already using like the Azure Developer CLI, then you can really just party on it. There's one area that I would like to fix. It's not going to be an easy fix, but something that you'll see in Aspire is like if you were to wire up your app host to like connect to cloud resources, to Azure resources, and you hit F5, you've probably seen this. Like the dashboard will show you some errors.
Yep.
And so you need to add the following configuration, like your tenant or your subscription ID and whatever, your region and your subscription ID. Hopefully we can get tenant in there soon. If you add that stuff to your either your environment variables, you can do it in Visual Studio. You can right-click your app host project and use connected services to do it, or you can just put it in your your configuration file or your environment variables. When you do that, it will just go out and deploy. It will configure all of the resources that you need. Great example of that is if I have OpenAI. OpenAI is the canonical example because it only runs in the cloud.
Yep.
Like I could do it locally, but why? If I want to use Azure OpenAI, I have to provision that Azure OpenAI instance before my code can run and hit it. So in that case, we have this concept of essentially dev time provisioning. So when you hit F5, if you have the configuration in place, we just go out and we provision everything. Then control comes back to the developer's machine. The code starts to run. The moment that they do like an AZD init or an AZD up, they'll probably create another resource group and another set of resources because they probably don't want to dev on the resources those are going to be volatile.
Yeah.
They probably want to deploy somewhere safe and party on the volatile stuff. We've had a lot of customers go, I want to use the same thing. There's a way that you can do it. It requires like you name the resource group a certain way, or you do something special in your AZD. So you direct traffic to the existing resource group instead of one that's already there. Is it ideal? No. If you're in that situation, what I'd highly encourage everybody do is like if you have to develop against live Azure resources, have your own sub, please. Yeah. Be an owner in that sub and don't ever put anything production into it and delete everything there. If you want, I've got an Aspire application called Cleaner that you can just install it and it'll clean up your Azure resources for you, which got me in trouble. If you want to do something like that, what you can do is pre-provision using AZD provision or AZD deploy, or you could get all the way to deploy if you wanted to, but you do AZD provision, then set that resource group as the resource group that you want to party on when you hit F5, and it'll just keep using that resource. So you can kind of pre-provision your environment if you want to.
Yeah.
Now, I'm probably scaring you because you're a platform engineer guy, you're a CI/CD person. You would never want a dev to do that. What you would probably want is
it's a playground. I mean, anything goes in a playground.
Yeah, everything goes in a playground. If you wanted to know where I think we're moving towards more than anywhere, I've been focusing a lot on security.
Yeah. And
to me, what I would like us to get to is, Brady writes code on machine, gets everything good, gets it the way he wants it, F5's to his heart's content, everybody's cool, needs to get the application deployed, commits all the code, pings Jeff. Jeff pulls the code down, AZD init, runs the topology, commits the topology to some other place because the dev doesn't need it in their repo or maybe in a branch of the repo. Jeff configures the repo to deploy to that topology, then sends me a note and goes, "You're ready." And at that point, I just code. Whenever I commit, it does a deployment. I don't know where it's getting deployed to. I have the URL to test it to make sure it works, but I didn't have to worry about it. Yeah. And not only did I not have to worry about it, Jeff didn't have to do a lot of work because Aspire does a lot of that for you. So like you could do AZDN for synth. Oh, well, I need to change this because corporate policy. But you could change it and you have those files locally. That's where I want to get us to, is a very streamlined experience where we've found, we were MVPs at one point, you know what I mean? We've always not been the customer.
Yeah.
We have a little bit more control over our cloud environments than most customers do. And in fact, when we were kind of joking with some of the MVPs at one of our conversations, and we said, how many of you just deployed in your own environment? 70% of the hands in the room went up. And we were like, cool, okay, that helps us make some decisions. A couple of the hands that went up yelled at me on Friday of that week, and they went, no, we don't let our customers do that. Like, why are you going to make decisions based on that? And I went, well, we're going to make it easier for you. To do the deployments. And they were like, please don't make everybody have owner access. Like, don't require owner access to use the tool.
Yeah.
It does help. But again, everybody should kind of have their own playground Azure subscription that they keep clean, where you can party on it and then hand your, IAC, your infrastructure as code, off to somebody like Jeff who can go provision the environment, get the repo set up so that now your life is automatic. That's where I think we want to go more than anything. And I think that's a distributed development process.
Mm-hmm.
I write code, you do the deployment, you do the provisioning, you tell me how to do the deployment. That's a 3 human process, just like a 3 node process in most file new Blazor projects where you add Redis. That's the nature of the beast when you're building these distributed applications. They're harder to deploy, they're harder to build, but they have a lot smaller components. You know what I mean? I think that's where I want us to get to in the tools. I've actually got a doc open right now that one of the things I want to highlight in the next wave of tooling that we do is to essentially optimize your development environment around DevOps. Like I want to make it easy for you to take an Aspire app and get it published using GitHub Actions pipelines or workflows or Azure DevOps pipelines. I want both in there. So hopefully we can give you that really, really soon, like in the next 12 months. Hopefully we can give you something automatic like that at least gets you started in the right path. That's a goal for me over the next year.
Well, there are a lot of teams that don't have this segmentation, and especially teams using Azure, they don't have dedicated systems engineers. They don't have sysadmin. They don't have this concept of, oh, there's somebody else that's deploying or managing the deployment. And the larger software engineering organizations have dedicated people like that, and they have the segmentation. But there's a massive number of software teams where it's just a group of developers and they do everything. And one of them has gotten pretty good at some of the sysadmin-y stuff. And so, yes, they're going to have access to the production Azure subscription to set it up, but they don't want to have one person like clicking a button or running a command every time they do the deployment. They still want to set up the automation and then back away from it and have it just work.
Exactly. I think the only thing that gets weird with that, and this is, I can imagine this from my own work. I worked in a mobile software company for a while. And during our stint there were 2 of us that kind of got into the build server. I was one of them, and there was a guy named Rich that got into it as well. And if they needed anything done in the build, they would always come to us. And we had this one big app, let's put it that way. And it had some BlackBerry stuff we had to deploy and some API stuff we had to deploy and whatever. And I remember the only thing that stunk about that whole topology was when somebody went, we're going to need another node. The moment you heard that in well, what about this API? Can't go there. Can't put it there. Can't put it there. Oh, we're going to need another node. The moment you hear that, you're like, I gotta go back and get the build scripts again. Like I have to add another compute node to the thing. Now it's a paragraph. It's like a block of text I can just copy, or a bicep function I can call. It's a lot easier than I used to do it in NANT and CCNet, which I'm sure you remember. That was easy too, but
Team City killed CCNet. It's like, Well, and the other constituent I'm thinking about, you mentioned app service, and there are some people using app service to host containers, but there's a whole lot of software that has very predictable usage patterns that doesn't need elastic scale. It's just very predictable. And if we have to scale up, it's like, hey, we know when we're having an event, and okay, let's set it to this level before the event, and we'll bring it down a couple hours after. Easy as pie. And app service is super easy. And that's why it's the most popular service in Azure, because it is so easy. And so that brings back to the question of how much is Kubernetes an actual dependency, or can normal .NET applications just use app service and not have any kind of notion of anything tied to Kubernetes?
That's a question that's a question for which there is not a factual answer. You've struck on an opinion. App service has been great. It's proven, people still use the heck out of it. I watch them, my team handles right-click publish. And we see the numbers ever increasing. They don't ever go down. We just added web jobs, right-click publish support in VS for App Service Linux.
Mm-hmm.
A funny fact, the very first thing I ever PM'd was right-click publish of web jobs to Windows.
Nice.
So it was fun to like kind of do the Linux part 10 years later. It was fun. We had a lot of customers asking for it. We've replatted a lot of stuff on top of Kubernetes. There are some services that you use in Azure that are built on top of AKS.
Mm-hmm.
There are some, Azure Container Apps is built on a version of Kubernetes. I don't know what version it is, but I know that a lot of the different services that we're building on top of Kubernetes. And then the internal thing of Service Fabric, we still build on top of that, which is also a container host.
Mm-hmm.
I think that for distributed applications, containers are definitely the way forward. App Service Linux uses it. With App Service Linux, bring your own containers. You can customize the container. With the other flavor, you just use our container. So it's there. Containers are definitely a thing on top of which many, many services are building themselves. I don't think anybody needs to get off of App Service unless you want to get into, I don't want to say this word again, cloud native concepts. Like if you want to like do something like write your own, custom Kata scaler that scales your applications, like some sort of elastic scaling. For instance, I've got one that I wrote to show how somebody could write a custom Kata scaler that scales out and in based on the number of Orleans grains in a system.
Mm-hmm.
So like if you have, 1,000 customer objects in the system, looks like we're having a sale. We should probably scale out. Boom, scales out. So, does everybody need that? Hell no. Not everybody needs that. When you don't need that and you want to let the PaaS do it for you, there's no reason not to use App Service. And with Aspire giving you the capability to deploy to it, there's really no reason not to use it.
Mm-hmm.
It's when you get into like operating system hooks. That's the only thing I would tell people, like kind of be wary. You know what I mean? Just be wary, because I think the industry is pushing us towards OS-less model of running your code. And I think the more dependency you put on, is this Linux call there? Is this Apple call there? Is this Windows call there? That's kind of when you get yourselves into, I've backed myself into a corner. Now I'm dependent on this thing.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to avoid that kind of lock-in with yourself. Would I tell people not to use App Service? No. Would I tell people to plan on switching off of App Service if they use Aspire? No. I demonstrated for you that you don't have to. Do I imagine there's a greater homogeneity between Aspire's technology and App Service in the future? Question mark. Don't know.
Sure.
Just don't know. You know what I mean? That's a tough one because Aspire has taken a very opinionated stance. So,
well, some of that opinion is great for existing applications that are running inside VMware or somewhere where they're thinking, you know what? Okay, this thing we got it upgraded to .NET. Whatever, one of the latest ones. Okay, and now we want to finally move it into Azure, figure out how that looks. And I love the scenario where we can generate bicep files and just say, okay, here's the structure of the application. How should it lay out in an Azure resource group? How should the subnet be configured? All these different things, besides just which resource is running the code, but the half a dozen other things that show up in your resource group that most developers are not well trained on all these little things, and how to do networking inside Azure, and how to do the firewall so that you can control ingress and egress and so many other things. And so I love the scenario where, and it looks like, I think in the next revision, it may be ready for prime time, where it's like, okay, suggest how my Azure should be structured for this application. Boom. Now I've got some bicep files. Now, regardless of if I go all the way or if I use Octopus Deploy, Azure Pipelines to actually do the deployment, it's like I've got an opinion from the .NET and Azure team on how the runtime architecture should be in Azure.
Totally. Yeah. We've enjoyed that. One thing that was fun is coming to Microsoft as an Azure person. I've always used .NET. You have to pry .NET out of my cold dead fingers one day. But I came here as an Azure person, and I've always been an Azure person at Microsoft. You know what I mean? There was a while when I was doing JavaScript on Azure as well. So I've always seen it from the Azure perspective. And what's nice is to watch the people who work on .NET Aspire, who are .NET wizards, like up one side, down the other. Devs who've been in Aspire, who've been .NET devs for longer than I've been around.
Yeah,
watching them learn the ins and outs of Azure watching them get frustrated over, well, this bicep thing goes this way or that way, like watching that, like seeing them kind of learn that area for like a year, and then getting to the point where they can really speak that language and talk about, we should do this because Azure does it this way. When you start to kind of see that, for lack of a better way to put it, that softening of opinion, because the .NET people have learned about Azure and learned how Azure does it. It's kind of like, well, we would do it this way, but that doesn't really work well in Azure.
Yeah.
And to allow the Azure folks to influence us as well has been very valuable. They'll like, we talked to Jenny on the ACA team. She's like, well, this is the way we do things in Azure Container Apps. It would be good if you guys could do blah, 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 and then blah, 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 blah. And when we would talk to them about, open telemetry, she says, so what are we going to turn on when we deploy a customer in dev mode to Azure Container Apps? Because you guys know, like, log analytics is our backing store for logs when you do like iLog or do whatever. And we're like, yeah, we're going to turn it all on. She's like,
that's expensive.
You're not going to be able to do that. She's like, you're not going to be able to do that. And we're like, why not? So then it's a matter of opinions, and she'll start to show us, if you turn this on, it's like $7 an hour.
Right.
And then we say, okay, we can't turn that on. So we start backing things off because we're learning how the Azure teams do it. It's been an empathetic journey, shall we say. But we've learned from deep integration with the Azure Developer CLI team. They've kind of said, if we set it up this way, we'll run into problems because of this. Whenever we want to add virtual networks, this will be hard, la, 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 la. So we're definitely skinning the onion. We're definitely getting to those hard problems. But a lot of it is, we've developed the courage, I hate to use that word, Apple. We've developed the courage to say what our opinion is in the form of the stuff that we're shipping, because we're working with people who know what right looks like.
Yeah.
And we want to ship something that's a little closer to right than whatever we shipped in the past.
Yeah.
Right is still opinion. Like, you might have a difference of opinion based on your worldview and the experiences that you and your customers have had to deal with. We're willing to hear that and then nod and go, okay, here's how you could enable that scenario. You know what I mean? But we're gonna stay the course on what we think the right way is. One of the things that we just talked about the other day is adding default VM support, virtual network support in one of the pieces of tooling. And the question was, well, what would we lay down for this? What would we lay down for that? And it's like, okay, go do it in the portal. And then we pull those settings in. Okay, the portal lays down this. Let's just lay this down. So that was kind of the road that we took. And we checked in with the team who wrote that stuff in the portal. And we said, do you have any regrets about the defaults that you've chosen? And they thought about it. And they said, when the default was this, we did. So we changed it to this. We think you should just use this.
Yeah.
And we're like, better than we do. That's what we're going to use.
Right.
So it's been a journey. It has been a journey. I can tell you that. We're not done.
Well, I love the integration with Azure, because it's pulling into the .NET developer skill set, maybe you call it cloud native sysadmin skill set.
Yeah.
Where it's not, okay, we're not going to rack and stack a server. We're not even going to configure Hyper-V or VMware. Now, the thing that is running the software, that's the umbrella of the sysadmin skill set. How is it running? How do we keep it running? How do we know? Yeah. How do we service it? All those.
That's cool.
All kinds
That's
of
good
things.
stuff.
And it expands. It expands the concept of what you might call the full stack developer. It's not just do some front end and some APIs and some SQL servers. Like, no, you're doing queues, you're doing topics and subscriptions, you're doing runtime, you're doing sysadmin, you're doing deployments. The concept of full stack developer is ever increasing. But if you say full, it's like, okay, no, the full stack, not just a subset of the stack, the full stack.
Right, exactly. That part's been good. You talked about some of the suggestions, and you're leaning in on the AI stuff. Another really nice thing about the way we've done things with Aspire and the IAC and whatever else is, when you have something so opinionated like Aspire, with like this is how you talk to Redis, this is how you talk to SQL, this is how you talk to storage, the AI does a much better job of suggesting you the right code.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If there's this much code to write, there's 10 lines of code to write, there's a lot more opinions that can get lost when the AI spits it out for you. We've seen some folks do some experiments with Aspire and AI where, like, the AI can just scan the docs, scan the repo and some samples, and it will make pretty pretty doggone accurate suggestions on how to write your code.
Yeah.
We have some hackathons that we've done in that regard that might come to fruition in the future. But when you ask the AI to help you write an Aspire application, it's a heck of a lot easier than if you ask the AI to write you a non-Aspire application.
Yeah.
It ends up a lot smoother. So yeah.
Nice. Well, thanks for all the work that you do on .NET Aspire and Azure and bringing them all together. And thanks for coming back to the Azure and DevOps podcast. I appreciate it.
Anytime. I'm looking forward to getting into some pipeline stuff. I take it you do a lot of stuff with Azure DevOps pipelines, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, I wrote a book on it in 2019 and continue to use it ever since. Yep.
I need to get. I don't think you ever gave me a copy of that book. I'm probably going to need it because I'm getting back into pipelines right now.
Okay.
And it's evolved so much. There's a lot of stuff I'm going to need to relearn.
Yeah.
Especially if you've ever deployed an Aspire app using pipelines, I'd love you to just like open an email, brain dump all the pain points because I want to try to mitigate all those pain points for you.
Yeah. The unattended
off of you.
Because the unattended AZD story is still pending, you can't really do it just yet.
Okay.
But because you have to have the interactivity of the authentication, so you have to have a human actually operating it to get it to deploy to Azure. So it needs to be able to run completely without a human interacting with it. And David Fowler said that was being worked on for the next version, but that's a known issue. But I think that's the one thing. It's like if those command lines could be just kicked off by some type of process without a human even at the keyboard, and the authentication happens and it runs, that I think is the only bottleneck to get any builder deploy server to be able to use the .NET Aspire automation.
Is that because like you can't use, for all intents and purposes, default Azure credential inside of an AZD pipeline because it doesn't pass the cred?
That may be
like some other ones.
That may be, but yeah, you have to personally operate in the terminal window in order to get it to go.
The terminal window? You can't do it in the browser?
For the deployment to Azure.
For the deployment, yeah. I was just wondering if it would pass your token to the terminal when it runs. Okay. I'll ping Phil.
And I haven't tried it. I think maybe 2 or 3 months ago I tried it. And thanks for coming on the show. We'll wrap up on this one. And dear listener, until next time, keep shipping.
Take care.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.